All right. Well, this is Thrice with North American Sustainable Farms. This is another interview with Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Today, the title is Micorrhiza What? And that's kind of because most people don't even know what mycorrhizal relationship, or any of that means. So it's just to kind of make you think because it's a very interesting word, and I'd love to have Dr. Richard Allen Miller go on to a very in-depth discussion. Maybe not too long here. We're just going to have a very by-the-point discussion about it. So first of all, Dr. Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Well, all things considered, I'm doing well.
Good, good. That's good to hear.
I'll leave that
Um,
as a pregnant.
yes, I do know that there's some things that may be happening in the background, but I'm glad that you have
Yeah.
a smile on and that you're trudging
Well,
on
there's
in the
not much.
war.
You never let them see you sweat.
Right? That's 100%. That's the best way about it.
It's
Is
attitude. That's what it's truly about. The attitude.
so. But and that's kind of what for me, mycorrhiza and the whole relationship of that. Mushrooms and plants and how they all correlate together. That's
Shrooms. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a really important thing I feel as far as getting into nature and learning about how the planet works as far as a larger system. So, I would really like to start off just jumping into it. Basically, the first bulletin we have is what is the mycorrhizal relationship? So first,
Well, yeah, yeah. Mycorrhiza is what determines the tilth in a soil. That means the communication from one subsystem to the next. And the soil can be thought of as Earth's gut. Just like you think outside space time, and there's a resonance going on with different hierarchies of bacteria and viruses and soil organisms or bacterium and hydra, all kinds of weird things going on in your gut. Well, the soil is exactly the same thing, and it's alive. And and it's resonant cavity oscillators. And where we're now starting to draw more interesting conclusions is in mycelium and the concept of mushrooms and their networking of one subsystem of mushroom sets to others, and how that is how plants talk to each other. So, mycorrhiza, where do we begin with that? That started in Austria when a woman, and I've lost her name at this point, I can come up with that. I met her at Acres USA as a keynote speaker. I was doing my thing on alternative agriculture. And she came in from Austria and showed how she took what appeared to be cement soil, completely dead like a lawn, and then within 8 years brought it back into full tilth. Tilth is how soil breathes oxygen, how air moves through it, how it's porous, so
okay.
that subsystems can interface and dialogue with each other rather than being clamped down like cement.
Hmm.
Okay, when it's more friable is a good word. That is what is called a horizon. That's in a forest. Your A horizon is your topsoil. Your topsoil is where you got B horizon and C horizons in agriculture. The B horizon is usually the subset of how soil becomes from rock, and your C horizon is usually, some stones down there that are slowly breaking down into minerals. Okay,
All
that's
right.
A, B, and C horizons in your soil. And when you go to the Midwest, you can watch them treating topsoil in the air in an aircraft. With the
Hmm.
wind, there's their soil up in the air, moving from one state to the next. It's pretty awful. Grasslands and forests are the only two places where you get uh, soil made, where it's created. A forest is extremely important because it has a bunch of dead matter, organic dead matter that's falling down, and it starts to rot. And it's those bacteria, mycelium, that are breaking mushroom. Mycelium is mushrooms. Mycorrhiza is the networking of those subsystems, plural, in a broader context of how one subset of mushrooms might dialogue with a different kind of mushroom. And they're all different kinds of mushrooms. Gourmet has been the one I spent a lot of time with marketing, 100,000 pounds a month of chanterelle, let's say, or morels into Canadian markets that would go into Europe or Japan. Where primary one was matsutake, with a pine mushroom, which is a $1.4 billion single market in the universe.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, that's gourmet.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, and then the pharmaceutical that are now coming out are discovering to be anti-cancer drugs as a byproduct of the way they're structured. Now, in pharmaceutical mushrooms, you have two primary chemistries. You have polysaccharides and beta-glucans. And I'm doing this just to give you a little foundation before we go right straight into the soil and how that relates to plants. This is very important background, different than others might give you, like amaranthus or others like that.
All right.
Okay, so the two primary chemistries, you start off with sugar, and then you have beta-glucans that are sugar molecules that are not sugar, but they're larger sugar molecules with other kinds of things going on it like that. Okay? That's a beta-glucan. That looks like, and it's the size of, a very large virus or a very small bacteria. Beta-glucans look like invading bacteria or small bacteria or large viruses. And so if you put transfer factor on that, it'll put that enzyme up there and put on your NK killer cells, and you have just sharpened your immune system. We're currently using beta-glucans from mushrooms with transfer factor in feedlots in salmon, Pacific salmon up in Skagway and Nanaimo. We're doing studies on that right now as an antibiotic substitute that works from a different concept that creates immune system regulars in large feedlots where the salmon are all together and there's a high end of diseases that'll get present. You have so many kill ratios. It turns out using these beta-glucans, in one study, there was actually 0 deaths of any fish that died in that one study. And that's impossible, and yet it happened. That's how effective beta-glucans. Polysaccharides, beta-glucans, polysaccharides are huge, huge sugar molecules, very, very large sugar molecules that may have as many as 100 oxygen molecules in it. And so as the sugar breaks down, becomes smaller and smaller, oxygen is released on a cellular level. And as you know, cancer cannot exist in an oxygen-rich environment. That means that if you're taking polysaccharides, the body makes mistakes all the time when it's reproducing cells, and so that's cancer. What you don't want is that to metastasize or continue to stay. That's what oxygen stops. And so by taking these superfoods, if you will call them pharmaceutical mushroom, reishi, maitake, agaricus, like the little button mushroom you buy on Safeway, that has one of the mushrooms that has polysaccharides in it. Okay, so we've got that figured. Okay, now that's my little wrap on the way we have traditionally at this point broken down what mycelium is and what mushrooms are. We've got them in 3 different kind of categories. Plants have a different relationship because they are using this little inner network of mycelium that interface with each other, and the little lines going in this way and ever that way, making the soil friable. That is the way information is transferred through the soil like a brain for Gaia. And there's a woman up in UBC, and I had her up there yesterday, but for our interview, but it didn't happen. So she's out of UBC, and you have her name, and she is suggesting that the mother tree in a forest will, when there's going to be a forest fire or a drought or a storm or whatever, sends out a network of information to allow the other plants to prep up and get ready for the assault, just like your body does. Okay, so they're as above, so below, and now we're talking about the presence of another kind of consciousness, Gaia. Micorrhiza is the first way we have entered into this concept from this woman from Austria. She then went to the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon, and started teaching the concept of Micorrhiza, of which her first graduate student, Amaranthus, is here in Grants Pass in Micorrhiza for a soil where you can inoculate your soil and become, and begin growing pharmaceutical, psychedelic, and or gourmet mushrooms in your forest that start to set up the consciousness of your garden. Is that kind of getting it clear as a metaphor?
No, I think that's wonderful to hear that the agricultural practice has really started to. There's spots that have started to incorporate that.
Some of this is agriculture. Some of this is horticulture. Some of this is cross-cultural in its disciplines, including physics and chemistry. And the chemistry involved now is quantum biochemistry that you would find in physics with Albert Gorky. And the physics involved is, what I'm trying to say is it's opened up a whole new branch of studies that are cross-culturally interfacing with each other, like I am with agriculture as a physicist. And it gives you sheds different shades of light on the product that gives you a better way of approaching how to use it. It's a model. It's a way of looking at things. And by looking at things this way, these are doors that open and these are doors that are closed. Like the salmon is a feedlot. We now have an alternative to antibiotics, but without the antibiotic stigma that goes within our food chain that we do not want. Got me?
Yes.
That's the difference in what we call GMOs with, Monsanto. What you were talking about, soils that have Roundup in it. Roundup in itself, glyphosate, is not a bad chemistry. It breaks down to inorganic salts within 10 days, unless you put it in the gene, so it's always present and always recreating itself. Now you have something problem. Okay, where I'm going with this, it's like a double-edged sword. When you do this, you also get that. And so you have to weigh, in terms of GMOs, what we would call that today, when something climatizes to a region, is a cultivar. But a GMO is one that's kind of like not belongs there because it didn't evolve there. It was put there by man. Now that's okay when man's trying to play God, but because there are other physics involved that we have not yet defined, you get byproducts that may or not be healthy. Micorrhiza are the different mushrooms that have now been shown to form the communication bridge, pretty much like the bacteria in your gut does for a human. You'll notice Micorrhiza is smaller than bacteria because it's a smaller subset. That's where the soil is possibly in a higher level of awareness than man is. It's important to understand resonant cavity oscillators and what they do and what they do not do when amplifying, biologically amplifying information going from the ear to the brain as a metaphor.
Wow.
What's that?
Wow.
Oh, you mean my look on it, the way I look at it? Yeah. Yeah, it's a slightly different edge because I'm a physicist, but that gives me the advantage over traditional agriculture in terms of the possibilities of what I might be able to do with that concept.
Right. Right.
Okay,
No, that
that's
makes
why
sense.
I'm in it. That's why I do it, because somebody's got to do it, and I am MacGyver. Well, that's
No,
what I do.
that's awesome.
I mean, I'm a mountain man. I want to talk to the earth, and I talked about habitats. When we set up sustainable lifeboats, it's not about permaculture or Anastasia. It's each habitat has a different requirement, and you let that environment talk to you like a physicist might, and all of a sudden you have different solutions for different habitats. Each habitat is
Right.
a little different. Okay, Micorrhiza is the same thing. There are different kinds of Micorrhiza, and these different kinds,
Makes sense.
there's a whole subset of them, and
Yeah,
each
that makes sense.
one, these are good for grains, those are good for the forest, these are good for your garden, those are
Right.
good. Okay.
That's really interesting. I mean, at this point, we're discovering so much with quantum physics, and again, like we're talking about, the mycorrhiza and the relationship between plants and mushrooms, and mushrooms serving as an internet. I mean, these are all amazing facts that are
But
100%
I've
being
never
proved
been
by
approached
science.
by a physicist before. And so that's what I'm trying to bring, a way of looking at things, physics. It isn't the way, it's a way that works sufficiently. And so, let there be light. And we went over and clicked, and there was light, and it was good. That part is well helped. That was a German roller canary on a migration going through Grants Pass, right there.
Oh wow.
My window. It was bright. My grandmother was the woman that got the Birdman of Alcatraz out of prison. She grew German roller canary songbirds, was world champion, and I grew up in her house
Wow.
setting up flight cages and things like that for birds. So I got to know the German roller canary. I even have to, there's a certain kind of a song that you can talk to the bird, and the bird will turn and look at you because you're communicating to it. That's what I'm trying to do with Micorrhiza. It is a
Right.
system of communication going from one subset to another, moving minerals, oxygen, and ions in a format that plants can help more healthy. If you dip in Micorrhiza, the root system, I got a picture in there, is 10 times what it would be from a normal soil.
Mm-hmm.
How well is that plant going to do? And how well is that plant going to do in a no soil environment like aquaculture, vertical aquaculture system, let's say going between here and Alpha Centauri? That's
No,
what I
I
did
yeah.
in 1970, was I worked under Art Pilgrim with Lunar Base Alpha 1 that later became the Space Center in Kent for Boeing. At that time, it was in South Park. My father was working there as a plasma physicist, and I went to work under Art Pilgrim, who did hydroponic gardens. At that time, it was New Galilee Garden, and we were growing tomatoes, and they had me switch to hemp, marijuana. I grew an indica variety because I was working at high altitudes with long ultraviolet, CBGs and CBCs. There are kinds of marijuana that are light sensitive, just like we have in habitats where this species, genus and species, this species grows up here, where that species grows down there because of light. There are variations. And each plant is a little different in the way it communicates. And that's mycorrhiza systems that I'm now learning how to talk and dialogue specifically to individual plants. What we're now finding in aquaculture, for example, right now, is that people are using LEDs because you have no heat loss or loss of your energy going into energy going to the plant, except in a specific bandwidth. Cauliflower being quite different than broccoli. And they each one have a certain bandwidth that they want, and that light is what absorbed into that plant, where this one over here is that one up this here goes into that plant, and this one down here is this, and it goes into that plant, and then this is up here, goes into that plant. They're all different bandwidths, and each plant is a little different in the way it's separating out the light, because it doesn't look at it as visible light with infrared and ultraviolet. Okay, so now you're understanding what a physicist does when he comes into looking at plants a little differently regarding habitat. Habitat is light sensitive, it's water
Interesting.
sensitive, it's temperature sensitive. Obviously,
Right.
Antarctica would be quite different than Minnesota. Well,
Yes,
yeah,
that is very.
okay. And so what kinds of plants you could grow out in the wild in that region over that one. Now, what
Right.
I did is right from the gate, started working with a controlled system with clean room standards where I
Mm-hmm.
had detox and, that thing with a bunch of lights hitting me before I could go into the project. And it was a closed system. That means all my inorganic salts had to come. This is 1970.
Right. Right. We've
Okay,
talked about
all
that.
my salts had to come from sources I could be self-sustaining in. And what we discovered is that all plants have the amount of minerals can be generated from 1/3 chicken manure, 1/3 rabbit
Right.
manure, and 1/3 worm casing. And that blend
Okay.
gave you all the inorganic salts necessary to do almost any kind of plant that we normally would grow. Now, that is part of the equation of Micorrhiza and why you choose this subsets of Micorrhiza for this kind of a garden as opposed to that Micorrhiza for that kind of garden. That kind of a garden might not be vegetable, might be an herbal pharmacy where you're growing some drug plants specifically for use when the grid's down and you don't have Walgreens.
Right.
That's happen. And so
Mm-hmm.
you need to, if you're on blood thinners and heart medicines,
Yeah.
well, where are you going to get them? You're going
No,
to.
I understand, and that's why, like, I personally, what our whole campaign is about with the indoor farm centers. Are you familiar? Are you familiar with actually juicing cannabis? This is something new that you got me excited when you were talking about the different CBDs. They were saying that some of the CBDs.
70s.
Yeah, well, that's what. But it's like, of course, the younger generations, like, we're completely locked off from this information. But that was like, it blew my mind. They were saying that because it's not heated and processed the way that normally you would, like, we've been taught to process.
What we're doing right
Yeah.
now is designing one for your kitchen table that is made from old stainless 305, 306 stainless used in Coca-Cola vending machines. You can get it for scrap.
Oh, okay.
And you can make a real cheap solvent extraction recovery plant that would allow CO2, that would allow you to pull CBDs, THCs, and all kinds of other things out that would create. This is what 99.9975% looks like in terms of that is THC, pure,
Oh, wow.
pure THC. Notice it's yellow.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we do. You put a little bit of that on your pipe and let it blend in with our pot that you've grown, and now you have what I've been smoking for the last 20 years.
Well, and for me personally, like, I guess not everybody processes it the same in your liver when you have it as an edible.
There's different blood types.
Yeah, so when I eat it, it really helps. Like the problems I have internally.
That's what we call enzymes and lactinum, and how you make whole foods out of things so that you can process that correctly in your diet.
Okay, so certain people can actually absorb, like, can eat cannabis that's been cooked and not actually get high from it, and it's because they are designed with certain enzymes.
Are quite different than THCs. The cannabinoids, we knew that one time was there were 60 different cannabinoids, and they ranged in a Gaussian distribution, going from soporific to psychoactive, and you had a Gaussian of it, and then different plants had a little bit different curve, and they all had different ones. And what you were looking for is a mother block. You were tissue culture back then, and you found the particular genetic style that you wanted. That was your GMO, and that's the one you cloned. And that cloning is done in a closed subsystem environment so that if it goes sideways, you can go in and sterilize it and start over. And that's the whole point of making it, one of which is the fiber that makes the sailcloth. When you pull a tight wind on that sail, you're going to have a stress on that that most fibers couldn't withstand.
Right.
Couldn't
Well, and
withstand.
it's just like mushrooms though. There's so, nature has shows us what are our tools as far as the technology that she gives us. And I think that that's something that's very important and why I'm so interested in agriculture, but I'm also a gamer and I love technology. I'm really super into robots and artificial intelligence, but I see the opportunity of potential realities that may be beyond most of the fear that a lot of people have for these things. And so that's what I'm trying to bring as far as like inspiring some younger people, because I know I don't have the answers. I just feel like if we could just inspire some young people to who are way smarter than anybody nowadays,
Smart, it comes
because
in many packages. You're a millennium, and
right.
you're very smart. You're not practical. That's all it's about. You're very smart, but you're not practical. And that's
Millennials.
what the old guard brings to the schoolyard is the
Yes.
idea. If you use a wheelbarrow, it's a whole lot easier to play a dirt yard because that's where we all are as children, playing
Right.
in the sandbox.
Well, I guess for smart, I meant I use the word smart in order to mean kind of an increase in development,
Or
cerebrally,
awareness of the
physically,
different
evolution.
relationships to things. That's
Right.
how I would put it. Yeah,
So
where you
getting
have a
to
broader set of rules.
right, and because of the work laid down from generations before you, you're able to bring more awareness to the table and
I'm
make
giving
better
you a different
decisions.
perspective, one of which puts one more facet on the diamond.
And that's kind of the whole thing of why I'm big into mushrooms. I don't know if you saw that live action Mario Brothers from the '90s, but I thought that hit it right on the head of the concept of like the fungus, and it seemed very metaphorical. It was like interdimensional with dinosaurs. When the asteroid hit, they became like launched into another dimension. Like, it was a really crazy storyline. I rewatched it after learning a lot of stuff and growing up, and then it was like, holy
Gotta
crap.
love it.
I think once we can study the kind of quantum level of it, kind of how they in Avatar, that Avatar movie with the giant blue guy people, when they took an electrical prod and they stuck it into the ground, and they were showing the electrical communication between the root structures of the trees. They're basically talking about mycorrhizal relationships.
Now we're starting to get the bigger picture of what a habitat is and its relationship in the subset of moving information from one subset to the other. And once you do that, now you have the mathematics involved in being able to understand how to put this subset together using this kind of mycelium over that kind of mycelium. And you have different kinds. There's a whole.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, and that's why I was so interested to talk to you about agriculture. I think it's just going to be a hard journey to get this information communicated with those who have not been exposed to even just simple aspects of law of karma, law of polarity. What is quantum physics and physics? Where does the line meet? Where is everything at with consciousness and electrical frequencies with the brain and the body? Like, all of that is real things, or all of those things are real in the sense of who we are as a fleshy being, and it's being ignored.
Yeah, your worldview opens a bunch of doors, and it also, as subsets, closes doors that are not possible.
Which is why I don't believe things.
Well, quantum physics is when we went from analog to digital, and then Heisenberg had to throw his little nickel in there and say, yeah, the more you know about one thing, the less you know about something else. It has its limitations in regard to quality and depth of information it might contain. Oh.
Well, to jump away from pipe bombs back over to Micorrhiza, I wanted to touch a little bit on mushroom species, and you kind of did go through, and you mentioned variety of mushroom species and how they interact with not only the environment.
I wish you could see this on your screen. Is there a way I can turn my camera onto my screen? Do you think?
Not through Skype that I know of.
Okay, because you can post this. This is called Dried Mushroom Resources from Northwest Botanical. A number of wild-crafted mushrooms from the Pacific Northwest are available to our diverse network of foragers. I had a network all through Oregon, Washington, on up into Canada, doing cascara and other native plants, so that we had a big network. What do you need? And we would get it for you. And if you were a floral trade, wanted salal or fern, we could take care of that. We did the same thing with pharmaceutical. Well, back then they weren't pharmaceutical, but they were, conchs and things of that nature. We did Garicus, which is not a Garicus. What was it? Fomus officinalis. It was called, it's a type of conch that's used to make bitters in England.
Okay.
There's only a couple places in the world where it came from. So this list shows you from January to February, and then April to June. Right now, from April to June, the morels are out, a little black morels, Pex morels, conical morels. The king boletes are out, and some black trumpets are out. And but you have to know where to look in habitat for find these different mushrooms. And this is these are called the gourmet. There's lobster, hen of the woods, chicken of the woods is a real big one here. When you find it around a tree, the chicken of the woods, you can harvest up to about 60 to 80 pounds of fresh mushroom, right then, right there, right as a single 10-minute. So, and there were, $6 to $12 a pound in the right location, and so you have supplemental incomes. That would probably be like lobsters, and that would be October through December.
No, I have to say, I love chicken of the woods. I've had chicken of the woods, and it is delicious. I've dehydrated it, and I've basically did a saute soak, and then dehydrated it. It was amazing. And then I've just fried it. I mean, I've done a variety of things with it. And
it also will tend to get tough if you try to hold it for any length of time. It loses, it turns into fiber quickly, and that is good roughage, but, it's not flavorful, and, it doesn't cook up nice.
No, here, let me show you something. Let me show you something real quick. I'm gonna grab something real quick for you.
Okay, sure. Cool. I love it when I make someone want to be spontaneous like me. Boom. Because that's in the moment. What do you got there?
So this is a almond agaricus. It is a it's a horse.
Agaricus is like yep.
But you can see it had some mycelium start to grow, and then it dried out a little bit because the moisture going in and out. So it's
I have
just
downstairs this big. This big.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is a single thing growing on a tree out in front of my yard here. And I've got them growing all over. That would be what is that? That's we have turkey tail, and we have reishi and maitake.
Wow. Yeah, I love mushrooms. Mushrooms are a huge thing for me. What do you think as far as when it comes to our closest relationship to nature and the whole mycorrhizal symbiosis concept to nature and humans? What top 3 mushrooms do you think, as far as
the Amanita muscaria has got muscimol and muscarine, which are sedatives that are used in pharmaceutical houses for when they're taking you into deep surgery.
Wow.
Muscimol and muscarine. That is a limited market. You start with Amanita muscaria. Mm-hmm. That's your so-called sacred mushroom. Then you move to the lighter psychedelics that I wrote for High Times on Magical Mushroom Handbook. And that was the book I wrote back in the early 70s for High Times, dealing with what we had done is we inoculated in Wallingford their compost pile. They have a big compost pile for the city of Seattle. And we inoculated it with psilocybin mushroom. And then, in fact, this particular one was a new hybrid under Dr. Stuntz, who was teaching that.
Right.
Dr. Stuntz, and it was Psilocybe stuntzii.
I was gonna say stuntzii.
Yeah, and we inoculated the entire of Wallingford, in Seattle, where every morning before sunrise, saw kids out in the yard picking mushrooms, and that was. And they had liberty caps down in Marymore that would grow about this tall, with long liberty caps going up in the tall grass. It's just everywhere. And we had up in was it Bellingham was the which genus that's has psilocybe biocystis, which was had
Okay.
biocysteine and a couple of other alkaloids that were respiratory. You know, you had to be kind of careful with that one because you had a
Mm-hmm.
respiratory thing like you're going to have a heart attack, but you don't. But it makes you feel like you will, and so it has a kind of a creepy side bent.
Huh.
There are the ones that most people like were the cyanescents. They're about this tall. They're big, wide cap.
Mm-hmm.
Philosophy stuncy cyanescents was the one I grew when I was growing them on logs down in my basement.
Wow. Okay, so those are log loving ones, wood loving ones. So that's what you mean
Well,
by compost.
you
So you
need
guys inoculated wood
yeah,
chips and
you
stuff.
need fiber for the
Okay.
mushroom, and
Okay. Well,
that
I
so
mean,
that's
there is philosophies that like the manure and everything, and then as
well,
well as
the
just like field
manure
areas.
is also fiber mostly.
Right.
It,
True.
but
True.
a different kind of fiber and acidic in terms of environmental habitat of it. And
Okay.
so it has a different kind of thing that you'll find that up in Tillamook. You'll find that will be not Cubensis. Cubensis is African. Um, there are different genuses, species up there, and then there were the other forms that had the same chemistry, which were liberty caps and not liberty caps. What were they? Paniolus. The paniolus
Right.
uh, and cyanabi. There were several other mushrooms that were considered psilocybin, but they weren't in the psilocybe genus. They were
No,
in.
I've actually looked extensively into the Panalois. Well, I say Panalois, but you said Paniolus.
Well,
I
was everywhere. I mean, you know, you have that everywhere.
Yeah.
It
Well,
takes a million of them to get anything off them, but like
well, I'm
that.
not saying as far as like for a trip or anything, but as a medicinal concept, if you look into the biology of it and the chemistry of it, it's got 5-HTTP in it. Like, I mean, like that's what makes serotonin. So like we're supposedly not able to really just eat serotonin and have it processed that way. But this has both serotonin and 5-HTTP. Most of those species have that, and that blew me away. I'm like,
You
wait a
know what
second.
that does, don't you? Is it grows those? Was it tryptophans? What is that called? That's your little power generator. Is your ATP? Adenosine triphosphate is where cold fusion occurs in the body. If you look at
Mm-hmm.
that molecule,
Wow.
the vortex,
Interesting.
and I have a technical paper at Cornell
Okay.
on that one. Um,
Okay.
ATP is how you change sodium into potassium into sodium,
Hmm.
and it's cold fusion in the body, and that mushroom will generate that with that HTP. What did you say? It was the chemistry was HG?
5-HTTP.
Oh yes, yes, ATC. Yeah, HTP. Yeah, that is what generates T. I'm losing my mind. I can't remember it. It's
It's all
basically
right.
adenosine
Okay. Adenosine.
triphosphate. That is where cold fusion occurs in the body. Curvon got a Nobel Prize for discovering that. He did not know, and they did not have it defined as ATP at that time. But
Mm-hmm.
that is a beginning chemistry for almost everything. And
Wow, and that's very interesting because you've mentioned cold fusion a lot occurring in nature, and I think that's very important because I didn't really realize what cold fusion was. So could you
it's the
explain
movement
that for a
of the wave
second?
moving faster than the wave.
Well,
That's
as far as like the chemical reaction with liquid, like as far as like just how
yeah,
basic it really is.
yeah. Cold fusion
Like,
occurs in a lot of different varieties. That's why they call it Brown's gas. And there's so many different forms of it. You know, just in the movement of a wave. I have a technical paper I can give to you on buckyballs or your C60 molecule, and in that I will discuss how that structure mathematically is really important. It's about geometry. That's what
right.
it's about, and the way a lock will fit itself in 4 space, not 5 space. So you have
Hmm.
different kinds of locks that open different doors in different levels of the universe. And these levels, that's your math. Right now, they're using string theory, but I have moved to a newer, more simpler form of knot theory, where you have different kinds of knots as a plasma, and the way it won't mix with itself, it'll create the way it works space time. These are dimensional gates that I'm now trying to apply with Micorrhiza as a language, logic.
Okay.
Yeah, and once I break that language, I'm going to be able to talk to that level of reality.
Wow. So, I mean, talking about Micorrhiza for this interview was actually a good topic to jump on for you. I didn't even know that. I love it myself. Like, I'm big into mushrooms, and it led me into that.
And I wanted to say something about Chuck Walters when he introduced me to this woman from Austria that later taught this new students that are out studying it. When I met her, she was young and bright, like this one up in UBC right now in forestry. And it opened doors for me. Now, what that told me is a great conference is not so much who they bring together as speakers and how they affect the audience, as much as how these great speakers affect each other's work and how it changes the face of agriculture. And that's where Chuck Walters was more brilliant than anyone I knew. He had a sense of whom to bring together as keynote speakers that would cause change of history in agriculture.
Wow, and that's important.
Well,
change is super important.
It's who influences whom in their studies. And I met a guy from Tilth, Oregon, organic. That started me in that direction. I met, I met some very important different kinds of people that have changed my way of thinking and led me to this moment where I have a sense of, in agriculture, of having studied with some of the greatest men ever, Dan Scow and Ulbricht, and some of those. These were people I got to meet as a young kid, just getting into agriculture. Today, I have written things like a 9-volume encyclopedia on alternative ag, and I have over 360 technical crop reports, mini books, ready to go on individual crops to include subjects like the ethics in marketing. When you have something for sale, you have a lot of different options in the way you can. The Germans are doing standardized extract, targeted chemistries, and what the market will bear. That means shortages and surpluses, so that the price is controlled. And you put market orders on certain kinds of crops to limit their production to keep the market stable.
Right. Well, and that's what we've talked about when you were talking about the Ithaca dollar and everything, and the concept of not having those kind of issues. And that's where I think, like, as well as with the internet, like this whole concept, and I don't want to go too far into the 5G hole, but just the whole concept of fighting 5G by establishing mini networks of lower frequencies that are more susceptible, like we're less susceptible to, because that is a thing. If we want to utilize technology, we can, but we shouldn't be just amplifying frequencies that are proven to cause damage to our brains and bodies.
Oh, you mean the 5G towers? I discussed that on Kerry Cassidy and Jeff Rentz as an end-game weapon.
Well, no, and that's why we don't need to go into all that. There, I know that you've talked extensively about that, and I'm sure lots of people are going to want to keep talking to you about it. For me personally, I'm a man of action, so I look at it as if people are eating healthier foods, exactly. If people are eating healthier foods, if people are learning about technology and how it reacts to the soil and the mycorrhizal relationships and to plants and mushrooms, they're going to understand, hey, wait a second, I'm one of these things too. And that's going to bring about those questions,
I need
and those thoughts.
Thought in right at this moment. You are no longer what you eat, but whom you feed. And when you look at it that way, isn't it interesting that everything you eat becomes you?
Right.
You wanted to know where our position in the food chain is. That's a good place to start. And looking at, what you become when you rot.
Oh, geez.
Like a tree. Well, what do you bring to the table in the forest?
Uh-huh. Well, that's what you were saying. You were saying about like the concept of the different habitats, the different soil makeups within those habitats, such as like this is a decaying death habitat, like a graveyard. Like that is something. There is mushrooms, even, so there's got to be bacteria and different things that focus on that kind of decay. But there are mushrooms that will grow where corpses are that have been covered over. Like it's fascinating how the Earth has all these symbiotic relationships in order to take care of itself.
I would be remiss if I didn't throw this concept in now also. The mushroom is not the fruiting cap. It is normally called the mushroom. The mushroom is mycelium, is actually the intricate, complex body in the soil called mycelium. Mycelium forms the habitat of relationship to the root systems with ions and gamma rays and other things of that nature. That then is how the root system talks to the mycelium, and that is Micorrhiza.
And that's what makes up basically this structural internet we're talking about.
That's right. Structural internet. That's right. Good word.
No, I love that stuff, and I generally just try to reference it as mushrooms because I want to be able to reach out to people who aren't maybe in depth with this. I know we've talked about cutting down the interviews a little bit. I'd love to chop up just the main agricultural keys into a smaller video, so it's like not going too far down the rabbit hole for them, but it gives them the start, those first little tidbits to get them on that journey.
This conversation, though, I've discovered, because I'm doing it, opens your mind to the possibility, and then over repetitive moments of rehearse, you start to find your own relationship to that, which sets up the archetype of what's about to happen.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand completely.
Sacred, yeah.
Right, and that's the ritualistic practice of, repetition is the father of learning. And I get that, and I've been working very hard to incorporate that in a lot of my different works and practices. I just know that there's a lot of people out there when they're getting bombarded by all this stuff. Like, we're competing, like people like you and me who are, well, not to say that we're equal in the sense of intellectual knowledge, but in the sense of, I know that we've talked about our journey and what we want to see for the world and what we would do to help it go in that way. Whatever kind of knowledge I may bring to the table and the vast knowledge that you bring to the table. And in that sense, there's a lot of people who don't even have that direction. It's not that they don't want to. It's not that they don't have the capability. It's that they don't know how, because you're constantly getting Nike, Pepsi, walk into a corner store and there's colors everywhere, that are just bombarding your eyes with these fluorescent lights. And it's literally manipulation at its finest every single turn, including these bright screens that are staring at us.
And Worthington put it, and behind door number 7, it's a new car.
And that's it. That's how it is for everything. Facebook has now been caught in this thing, and now ex-CEOs, ex-representatives are all saying, no, we designed this to feed off your emotions. We're literally going positive, positive, negative, 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 positive, positive, negative, negative. Like, we're literally, we've programmed these apps to just get you to keep scrolling and to get you to keep clicking and to keep triggering.
Sleight of hand, and action. You're watching Harry in your pocket.
Yeah. So kind of rolling off of that topic, I want to kind of start to wrap this up in the because I know you've got stuff going on today, but I want to kind of finish this up with the concept of human beings, the mycorrhizae relationship of Earth, and polyculture, or I think as you called it, because I learned it as polyculture, but you call it interspecies cropping. And from what I understand, it's pretty much the same thing. Polyculture
is when you're trying to stop an invasion of spit beetle, let's say, into your spinach.
Okay.
You got a bunch of spinach growing, and you've got spit beetles starting to come in all over the place, or aphid. When you intercrop, you set up barriers. Like if you put a row of spinach in, and then next to it, marigold.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen to the, what is it called? The root borer moth. Going to try to fly over that to get into the spinach, but the habitat sets up a field of pyrethrin with marigolds, pyrethroids, and
Okay.
starts as an insecticide. And so if you do fields where you're putting barriers around your crops with certain kinds of laws that you're trying to, I call that intercropping. The second kind of intercropping is when you have a horse that can't eat alfalfa. It's too hot for the stomach to digest, give them indigestion. And so you put field grains and grass in with it to make it what's called feeder hay. Okay, over dairy grade in your alfalfas. And there is, using triticale and other kinds of native grasses, a 6-grass blend that if you put that into your field as a mix, that horse can graze forever on that field and have a perfect, what we call whole food, in terms of amino acid delivery to the gut.
Wow.
That horse, which is different than a cow. And that's a different kind of intercropping that you can do that creates whole foods for a cow. For a cow, especially in Osaka, it doesn't have, its feedlot is a 60-story building where the cow never sees the light of day, like salmon, and walks around in a circle with light and all of that, and darkness. What happens is that cow becomes rampant with disease as a feedlot.
Right.
And so and that's an outer space type of feedlot, it's like your closed system.
Right.
Okay, what are you going to do? Antibiotics? No. I discovered that if you fed that cow a 60% comfrey, 40% alfalfa pellet, that cow had all the whole foods, all the foods necessary to digest all the nutrients out of the foods that it was eating.
Interesting. Okay.
So it virtually eliminated all diseases in cattle. Now, that's because it added a lysine and a lantuin, which were amino acids not present in alfalfa. And the protein levels of comfrey are 24 to 28%, where alfalfa can go from 12 to 22% dehydration.
Right.
They're different amino acids in the protein structures. Now,
well, that's like I was learning about wood sorrel recently, as well as wild spinach or lamb's quarter. Like those are both really high protein content as well, and they're wild forages.
Some of the secret ingredients in making ENIAC and some of these traditional formulas out of the Acadian forms of medicine out of Canada. And so, you have tradition with old witchcraft and the way they put their pharmacy together. How they did their pharmacy with intercropping.
Interesting. Wow.
Well, that's a habitat thing. You can tell more about what the soil is doing by the weeds that are growing on it and the way they're growing on it than by any kind of plug culture, dropping and getting full chemistry. You can learn more about the soil just looking at what's growing on it and how and why. Thistle might suggest that the soil has broken down into clay pack, been grazed too long. It needs to be brought back into tilth.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, so let me ask you this then. So are you saying basically through the perspective of a physicist, through the perspective of understanding, metaphysics, quantum physics, and even deeper conscious practices, they're looking at agriculture through that perspective and taking these actual scientific facts, because a lot of what you're saying, there's mainstream scientists in these individual areas that are talking about these different things. They're just not compiling it together because they're looking at it from a physicist perspective.
That was what cultures did in putting these conferences together, and the individuals, like this woman from Austria with someone like me.
Right.
That's
what are
genius actually showed, because it changed my whole approach to agriculture.
Right. And so what I'm asking though is so what you're saying is this almost proves even more that as human beings, like, we need to not look at ourselves as separate from the planet. We need to not look at ourselves.
We're part of the environment. We are part of the environment. What part do you think is important? Do you think you can be God and rule it? Or are you going to try to cooperate, adversarial, as opposed to corresponding?
Mm-hmm.
The soil is talking to you about what it wants and needs.
Right.
You're trying to talk to the soil like an Anasazi, or a
Okay.
cliff dweller. You're farming, and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to get along in an environmental relationship with the thing. And you have other
Yes.
concerns like robbers, and so you live in cliffs to protect yourself rather than have weapons. There's different ways you go about defending yourself. There's your martial arts circle.
Right.
It's a relationship of philosophy first. And I was raised Northern Shaolin, and so I don't have an aggressive attack on trying to control the environment. Mine is more a corresponding of what does the environment want from me for me to get along with the environment.
Right.
And
A symbiosis.
if you'll notice, a desert is quite different than a forest. And instead of mushrooms, which, by the way, a desert does have, it has cacti, different way of storing water.
Right.
And so your habitat determines the kinds of mycorrhiza networking that the underpart of the soil has. And if you look at the underpart as a cavitation ball, instead of a reflection of what's going on the top of the thing, like into the outer, above and below the soil, as a reflection of each other.
Right. Micro, macro.
And white hole, black hole. Then you start to see how information is moved from one subsystem of mycelium to another, the root system in a plant. And that's where oxygen, friability, and the habitat part become critically important in the way the dialogue is managing to the next and the way it's talking to itself. That is the part that I'm studying now, and is what I will call Micorrhiza. It is a system.
That's awesome. That's seriously wonderful. I mean, I think that there's so much information that is bottled into this. You know, it's only been about an hour and 18 minutes right now, and I think it's fascinating. I really did not plan. I did not plan on this being a topic that you're actually actively focused on right now. I thought of it as just like, it's very important, you know, so we'll talk about it.
No. It is the new direction in agriculture. It is the foundation of how you find your peace with the environment. It is a way of dialoguing with the environment in a more corresponding rather than adversarial format.
Mm-hmm.
And one just, how did the president go up to the alien in Mars attack? Why can't we all just get along? And the alien laughed, stabbed him, and then had a tear. You know, I gotta say, attitude and the way you look at what you're doing in farming is essential. Mm-hmm. And you should actually feel as if you're talking to a plant, because you actually are. And that's
right.
And, you know, the secret life of plants and how they respond to music and Beethoven, just like chickens do for free range. Chickens and low cholesterol. Listen, man, it's a little bit of the hokey pokey and you turn your left side in.
Yeah, I mean, with all the arguments about what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, and what politics you should, you know, be supporting because of whoever's rights or whatever is being done for the all, it's really...
Yeah. You eat your environment.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is it really comes down to, you know, we need to focus on our habitats as individual communities, as individual societies.
And not the other, where others thrive in that habitat. I couldn't possibly live without a sea near me. I'm Pisces.
Yeah, I love water myself too. I'm Pisces too, so I had to agree with you on that one. No, and like, I love being in nature. Like, that's one thing, even if it's the desert or it's the woods, as long as I'm not in the confines of brick walls, I can function
Well,
properly, you know.
how about this one? The University of Pennsylvania has made it illegal for you to walk or hike in forests that are not 5G friendly.
Wait, what?
Ah, wakey, wakey. Okay, so walking in
Wow.
nature is to get away from technology in a sense, isn't it? For you and
Yes.
me. Yeah, that's why you walk in nature. You're trying to get away
Mm.
from computers and sitting in a chair and virtual reality, like right now.
Yes, I have three
Like
screens
to
in front of
be
me.
in the moment, in
Right.
nature, right then, right there.
Right.
Well, the University of Pennsylvania says you're not safe as a hiker if you don't have access to a cell phone.
Oh wow.
That's a new law.
Oh my goodness.
Can't
My
bring me up.
safe space is uncomfortable.
This is a metaphor. It's done with the intent that you must have access to help, right? If you're going to
Yeah.
the woods. Now, what's different in that universe over the one your grandfather lived in? Well, it's about the same difference as the America of George Washington over George Bush. And
Mhm.
so when you look at things from that kind of perspective of how it's all changed and what's the role of the government in its relationship to you as a sovereign captain and commander, maritime law individual, moral codes of ethics, rules of conduct, not laws, federal and state, you know, it's something's wrong here. That's the part where your garden changes things because your garden is also like your sovereign part of self and your sovereign rights growing your own food, medicine. That is the part of the bigger picture that I would have hoped comes out of agriculture and its purpose as a farmer is actually a polymath. He has to be, or she has to be an expert in a multiple fields, including animal
Right.
husbandry, welding, seed recovery, da 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 da. I mean, if you're going to run a tight ship, you have to have a bunch of skills and required. And sometimes when you don't have them, you're not the welder you have down the neighborhood. You have something to trade to. Like you're
Right.
roasting coffee.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
I think that's
Cottage
one thing.
industry,
Go ahead.
no. Cottage industries are the way that make you vertically integrated. That means you're taking your crop and putting it not with a bunch of other people in the same crop for export, but you're adding value to it prior to farm gate. And that is because you have more to sell than your crop. You have your labor. And I would rather be doing it at $40 an hour than $4. And when you add value to dandelion and chicory, now instead of a medicine, you might be doing an Indian herbal coffee substitute.
Right.
And you have something to barter for something they have you don't have.
Right.
Amaranth,
That makes sense.
yeah. You might have amaranth. Who knows? Grains, crops, stuff that are important to your survival, but you don't have access to someone else near you, your neighbor. It will be
Right.
your neighbor that saves your life. That's where the scheme of your fitting into the whole of things. It will be your neighbor that you don't know that will save your life.
I agree 100%. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest reasons the concept of community right now at this point, with all the social media, with all the internet and everything going on, we need to really acknowledge that, yeah, networking and community is super important, whether it's all across and different hubs and, connecting across the place.
In Chicago, we had the bulk commodities exchange. We started in Seattle, called the Pike Street Market. I was part of Growing Family when we did that. And basically, the concept is that you have a running inventory of, let's say, 20 farms in the neighborhood and what they have for sale that day.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a type of farm networking where you invest in the local farm with farm crop, and you agree to buy so much lettuce in a given year. And then that man knows approximately how much to grow, where he's not overgrowing it and has surpluses and doesn't know what to do with it. The whole concept of farming, in my opinion, will become the network of choice for survival. And
Right.
getting a product to market every third day in a large city, when the grid goes down, that all stops. And so
Mm-hmm.
most cities, Grants Pass, where I live, probably grows less than 4% of the food consumed here.
Hmm.
And what you should try to do in the next year is increase that to 20%.
Right. Everywhere.
That
Like
20%
everywhere.
of what you eat is actually, that's your requirement in the way you shop and the way you go, where you go to buy. That
Mm-hmm.
should be your goal, is that this next year, I want at least 20 to 40% of what I eat, I want it to come from farms I know where it came from or myself. Where you can it, put it up,
Yes.
barter, with your jam or your fruit or whatever you can barter with someone growing cucumbers or
Well,
whatever.
and the funny thing is that's the pure, like, that is literally capitalism, voting with your dollar, and I think that's one of the big things that it seems like a lot of people don't quite want to acknowledge because they're so wrapped up in their everyday lives. It's like, oh, I just got to get this done. Oh, I'm at least buying organic. It's like there's always an excuse. It comes down to, as a whole, we need to collectively make the right decisions with what we're putting into our mouths. We need to make the right decisions as far as what
There
companies we're
are
supporting.
rules of the road. One of them in permaculture is that if your garden is further than 60 steps to your kitchen, you will only use half as much.
Okay.
In other
Okay.
words, if you want to go from 20% to 40%, your garden has to be on the second floor right here where my deck is out here, and my kitchen is right here, and it's less
Yes.
than steps.
Well, and even doing the indoor concept, which is why we're so
Well, that's
focused
yeah,
with the
my
farms.
second story atrium, yeah.
Right, and doing, even like, now you have the hanging aquaponic recycled bottle systems, like doing projects like that for kids. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can really combine in our education to begin to solidify this symbiosis, to really take charge in this,
Your food
mycorrhizal
system,
relationship.
yeah, your food system has to be 60 steps or less to be functional.
Right. Right.
well,
That makes sense. That makes sense. Well,
if you do that, you're going to use twice as much from that source. And if you're
okay.
20% right now, you put it closer, and it'll be easy for you to move it to 40%. That is the first rule you might want to do. You also want to do a similar thing with water. We'll talk about that in another interview. But these are rules that are set, that are now evolving out of all these different systems from Anastasia. Up in Canada, they call it what is it? New crops development. It's called appropriate technology minister, and that means that minister is in charge of what the region has for resources over the rest of the county. The region might have a drum dryer down the street or a combine next door. That would allow you to grow more certain kinds of grains and what is called sharecropping.
Right.
And the idea of custom farming, where the guy that has the combine goes in and combines several different grains in stages. So his combine is used, instead of this amount of window, the window is now extended to this amount of window, doing individual crops. That is called appropriate technology in the field of agriculture now, and that is taking into account, unique features in that. You like you have a barn over there that is airtight. If it's airtight, now
Okay.
you have a dryer. You have a possibility. You see,
Yes. Yes.
you can
No,
build it.
I hear you. I mean, there's so many different aspects when it comes to simple technology in agriculture that would just completely advance us if we stepped away from this mass farming concept or the factory farming concept, because it's just like as simple as wildcrafting. There's so many people with just an acre to 5 acres who have either like wood nettle, stinging nettle, like I was saying before, lamb's quarter, or even
You know
ragweed,
what stinging
and
nettle?
all these things.
By the way, Revlon buys 400 ton from Europe every year to make a hair rinse.
Are you serious?
I have
Stinging
400
nettle?
ton of stinging nettle
Oh
with
my
cut
gosh.
in the herbaceous stage.
Oh my gosh.
You put it up as a bale. Has a mild condition on it, and you bale it at 12%. There it is.
That is crazy. See, and that's what I'm saying. Like we're talking about. I have an associate, and he's got some acreage, and we're talking about utilizing some of his wildcraft area. And I've been working with him for him to learn different things. And he found out. I thought it was stinging nettle. It's wood nettle, and it has some of the same properties. So
No,
we're
no,
talking
no.
about.
There's dead nettle. Dead nettle is inedible.
Okay.
It's dead nettle is slightly different than stinging nettle. Stinging nettle has formic acid on it. By the way, if you get stinging nettle or poison ivy or poison oak on you, you can fix it with vinegar and baking soda, or in nature it would be
Red dock.
bracken fern juice.
Okay, rock and fern juice. Have you ever heard of using burdock? I think is what it's called.
Burdock there's two kinds of there's lesser and greater burdocks. The
Okay.
greater burdocks might possibly help a little bit. The minor burdocks are mostly edible. That's another European vegetable, one used in Asia a lot also.
Right.
That we don't
Yeah.
use in our diet, but it's edible.
Yeah, that's that and pokeweed. I found out those things grow rampant out here. Yeah, and it's like a huge traditional like sacred food kind of thing. Like not like sacred as in,
yeah, there it is.
and they're like this one lady was talking about. It literally grows only for a certain amount of time, and it produces all this abundance of food. And you have to know about it to process it properly, and then boom, you have this nutritional source.
That's a chapter that book is in native plants of commercial importance. There's 50 chapters.
Wow. Okay.
And how to go in and take it, how to leave it so it renews itself, and the sequel ready to go to press is called Forest Farming. Instead of wildcrafting, you're using you grow the products like cascara. You harvest the tree and you reset it.
Okay, well that's wonderful. I'm always excited to see more books coming out by you. And I'm gonna go ahead. It's about an hour 30 here. I wanted to wrap up. If you could just let everybody know again your website addresses that they.
You can find me at richardallenmiller.com, ALAN Miller.com. Richard Allen Miller /shop will be my books, and I'm on Facebook every day posting my concerns at DOC RAM, Richard Allen Miller. DocRam.com will take you to Facebook, and I have 2 places on there to include Dr. Richard Allen Miller and Sustainable Lifeboats is another thing on Facebook that I have. If you go to Sustainable Lifeboats, there I am, and I post there as well. That's not as popular yet. It will become so because I've trademarked that name. It's a lifeboat with oars.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the last interview, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it more when we go into as far as survival agriculture and preserving agriculture, because that is something I want to get into. I mean, our society does have seed banks. Why do we have seed banks? It's like we should all consider these things as individuals, because it's up to us to really. It's up to every individual to preserve life. I look at it.
Here in Grants Pass, Oregon, have gardens in the playground.
Wow, and
that needs to be everywhere. To the food bank, the local food bank, and the Gospel Mission Rescue. And the transits that go through all get to farm. If that's what they want to do.
That's wonderful.
And with vets. Yeah.
That is. Farming. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to hold on here. I'm gonna do a quick closeout, and then I just wanted to wrap up with you, and then we'll go ahead and end the call. Is that good?
Works for me. Go ahead. You bet.
All right. So that was Dr. Richard Allen Miller. I really appreciate having him on. He's been just a great, a great, a great teacher when it comes to a vast array of information, and it really has impressed me when it comes down to um, seeing more and more people who are focused on combining these different topics and showing the rest of society, like, hey, maybe if we just approached it from a collective perspective, we could actually create the change that we want to see. So I'm really excited that we're going to keep having interviews. We're going to keep having interviews like this, and we're going to be streaming them live on Twitch. You can find the edited down version where it's focused on the key topic points and just on the agriculture stuff. Really, that's going to be on our farming YouTube channel, but the live version will be thrown up on our LALT Radio family channel. That's going to be where all our back end vlogs and live interviews go. So yeah, really appreciate all of you who've jumped in. We had some people stay with us for a lot of time here. That's really cool. Really appreciate you all jumping in here. And those who are watching this on YouTube, remember, you can check us out live when we do this. It's going to be 8 a.m. on Tuesdays. Didn't get that this week. That's my bad because of the camera. But we will be doing 8 a.m. Tuesdays, and that is Pacific Standard Time. And we will be having the opportunity.
Pacific Daylight Savings Time. Pacific Daylight Savings.
Correct. And you can jump into the chat and you can ask any questions while we're talking. May not get you right at that point, but we will stop and address your questions, and those will be a part of the interview. So again, really appreciate all you checking out and appreciate you on the live stream. We will see you next time.